You are standing in the checkout aisle of a grocery store, staring at a receipt that doesn't make sense. A handful of vegetables, a carton of eggs, maybe a simplistic luxury like a bag of coffee, and the total is equivalent to what your parents spent on a week's worth of groceries in 1999. There is a specific, visceral kind of nausea that comes with tapping your card in 2025, a low-grade hum of anxiety that never quite turns off. It is the realization that the math simply does not work. You did everything right. You went to school, you got the degree, you avoided the criminal record, you landed the job that was supposed to be the ticket to the middle class. And yet at the end of every month, the account balance hovers terrifyingly close to zero. But if you voice this anxiety, if you dare to complain about the impossibility of survival in the modern economic landscape, the response from the cultural establishment is swift and dismissive. They tell you it's your fault. They tell you it's the latte. They tell you it's the avocado toast. This specific culinary scapegoat, the avocado toast, has become the defining symbol of the gaslighting of an entire generation. It is a brilliant piece of propaganda because it personalizes a macroeconomic catastrophe. It shifts the blame from a broken engine to the passenger. But let's actually do the math, stripped of the moralizing and the insults. Let's look at the raw data of purchasing power parity to understand why Gen Z feels like they are drowning in a shallow pool. In 1980, the median home price in the United States was roughly $47,200. The median household income was about $21,000. That is a price-to-income ratio of roughly 2. A house cost a little more than 2 years of salary. Today, in many major metropolitan areas where the jobs actually are, that ratio has exploded to over 7 or 8. In strictly mathematical terms, housing is nearly 4 times more expensive relative to labor than it was for the baby boomers. To suggest that skipping a $12 breakfast once a week will bridge a gap of hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate appreciation is not just bad advice. It is a mathematical insult. The cynicism of the bootstraps narrative falls apart the moment you layer the cost of education over the cost of living. When boomers were entering the workforce, a summer job could legitimately pay for a year of college tuition. This isn't nostalgia. It is historical ledger keeping. The University of California system, for example, was virtually free for residents until the Reagan era shifted the burden onto the individual. Today, Gen Z graduates are carrying a debt load that functions like a mortgage before they have even signed a lease. You are entering the race with a 50-pound weight chained to your ankle, competing against runners who started halfway down the track with a tailwind. This debt does not just vanish. It compounds. It eats into the ability to save, the ability to invest, and the ability to take risks. It forces a generation into risk-averse, corporate servitude just to service the interest, killing the entrepreneurial spirit that the older generation claims to value so highly. Then there is the issue of silent inflation or shadow inflation. The official Consumer Price Index, numbers that politicians parade on television, are a sanitized version of reality. They often utilize substitution metrics, assuming that if steak becomes too expensive, you will buy hamburger, so the cost of living hasn't technically gone up. But you cannot substitute rent. You cannot substitute the heating bill. You cannot substitute the insurance premium that has doubled in 3 years. For Gen Z, the basket of goods that actually matters, housing, healthcare, education, and quality food, has seen inflation rates that dwarf the official 3% or 4% figures. We are living through a period where the currency is being debased at a rate that outpaces almost any entry-level salary progression. The entry-level salary of $50,000, which sounded like a fortune in 2005, is practically the poverty line in 2025 urban centers. Yet corporate job postings still proudly display these numbers as if they are competitive, seemingly unaware that $50,000 today has the purchasing power of about $30,002 decades ago. This divergence creates a psychological phenomenon often derided as doom spending. Observers see a 24-year-old buying a designer bag or an expensive dinner and scream, irresponsible. But look closer at the logic. If saving for a house requires a down payment that is moving away from you faster than you can save, if the house goes up $20,000 in value in the year it took you to save $5,000, then saving is mathematically futile. The goalpost is moving at Mach speed. In that context, spending money on an immediate, tangible pleasure is not irrational. It is a coping mechanism for a future that has been foreclosed upon. Why save for a future that you cannot afford anyway? It is a rational economic response to a hyperinflationary environment where the asset class is gated behind a wall of inherited wealth. The social contract stated that if you work hard, you will be able to afford the basics of a dignified life: a roof, a family, a retirement. That contract has been breached. We are witnessing the death of the delayed gratification model because the gratification part has been deleted from the equation. When a boomer saved, their money sat in a savings account earning 5% to 7% interest. Their money worked for them. When Gen Z saves, their money sits in an account earning 0.1%, while inflation eats 4% of its value annually. Their money is actively dying. To scold a young person for not saving in an environment designed to punish savers is to fundamentally misunderstand the banking environment of the 21st century. The system is awash in liquidity for the banks and asset holders, but it is a drought for the wage earner. We have optimized the economy for asset appreciation at the direct expense of wage growth. Every time the stock market hits a record high, it is usually because companies have squeezed more productivity out of fewer workers for less pay. The stock market is not the economy. For Gen Z, the stock market is often a graph of their own exploitation. And yet the gaslighting continues. We are told the economy is strong because GDP is up. But who is it strong for? If the GDP grows but the median wage stays flat while rent doubles, the economy is technically growing, but the people are shrinking. This is the definition of a silent depression, a period where the macroeconomic indicators look healthy to the investors on Wall Street, but the daily reality on Main Street is one of desperate survival. We are living in a bifurcated reality. There is the economy of the asset owners, the boomers and Gen Xers who bought homes before 2008, and the economy of the renters, the Gen Z service class who are paying off the mortgages of the generation above them. The friction between these two realities is heating up. You feel it every time you look at Zillow, every time you pay a student loan bill, every time you see a headline about lazy workers. It is not a delusion. It is not an attitude problem. It is simple, brutal arithmetic. And to understand how we arrived at this point, where the numbers no longer add up for the most educated generation in history, we have to stop looking at the receipt and start looking at the machine that printed it. That machine has a specific manufacturing date. If you trace the trend lines of almost every major economic metric, wages versus productivity, cost of living versus median income, the price of gold versus the dollar, they all undergo a tectonic shift around the early 1970s and solidify into a new operating system by the early 1980s. This was not a natural disaster. It was a deliberate re-engineering of the social contract. To understand why Gen Z is broke, you have to look at the Great Decoupling. For decades prior to this pivot, as American workers became more efficient and productive, their wages rose in lockstep. If you made the company more money, you took home more money. But around 1973, those lines split. Productivity kept climbing, we got computers, the internet, automation, and workers became exponentially more efficient, but wages flatlined. Adjusting for inflation, the average worker today has roughly the same purchasing power as a worker in 1978, despite being massively more productive. Where did the excess value go? It didn't disappear. It was siphoned upward. This was the result of a shift in corporate philosophy from stakeholder capitalism, where a company had a duty to its workers, its community, and its shareholders, to shareholder primacy, a doctrine popularized by economists like Milton Friedman. The new rule was simple: the only social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. This philosophy justified the stripping of benefits, the crushing of unions, and the outsourcing of labor. But the smoking gun, the mechanic that truly accelerated this wealth transfer, was the legalization of stock buybacks. Until 1982, it was generally considered market manipulation for a company to buy its own stock to artificially inflate the price. Then SEC Rule 10b-18 created a safe harbor for this practice. Today, companies spend trillions of dollars on buybacks. Instead of using profits to increase wages, which would help Gen Z, or invest in research and development, they use the cash to pump up their own stock price. This brings us to the housing market, which is perhaps the most egregious example of intergenerational economic warfare. The housing crisis is often framed as a supply and demand issue, which is true, but it omits why supply is so low. It is an artificial scarcity engineered by the incumbents. In the post-war era, housing was treated primarily as shelter. But somewhere along the line, we decided that housing should also be the primary vehicle for middle-class wealth accumulation and retirement. These two goals are fundamentally contradictory. For housing to be a good investment for a boomer, it must appreciate faster than the rate of inflation. For housing to be affordable for Gen Z, it must stay tethered to wages. It cannot do both. To ensure their investment, their home, kept skyrocketing in value, local homeowners weaponized municipal politics. Through restrictive zoning laws, historical preservation districting, and the fierce, not in my backyard or NIMBY movement, existing homeowners effectively made it illegal to build affordable, high-density housing near where the jobs are. They pulled up the ladder. By blocking new supply, they guaranteed their own asset appreciation, creating a feudal dynamic where the landed gentry collects rent from the permanent tenant class. This is not a free market. It is a cartel. When you pay $2,500 for a one-bedroom apartment that cost $600 a generation ago, you are not paying for the value of the structure. You are paying a protection fee to the generation that legislated scarcity into existence. Simultaneously, the education system was transformed from a public good into a predatory lending scheme. The logic of the Bennett hypothesis suggests that when you increase the availability of federal student aid, colleges simply raise tuition to capture that money. And that is exactly what happened. The government guaranteed the loans, removing the risk for the banks and the universities, and placed 100% of the risk on the 18-year-old student. Universities bloomed into resort-like campuses with exploding administrative salaries, funded by the future labor of Gen Z. We told an entire generation that they were worthless without a degree, and then charged them a premium for it that ensures they cannot build wealth until their mid-30s. This is a wealth transfer mechanism. The interest payments on student loans are essentially a tax on social mobility, funneling money from the striving young to the financial institutions and bloated university endowments. Furthermore, we must look at the credit system itself. It is easy to forget that the FICO score, the number that dictates your ability to get an apartment, a car, or a job, was only standardized in 1989. It is a relatively new invention designed to gamify debt. It conditions the population to maintain a healthy level of indebtedness. To participate in the economy, you must first prove you are a good debtor. For a generation entering the workforce during the gig economy, where income is volatile and traditional employment contracts are scarce, this system is punitive. The gig economy itself is a systemic workaround to avoid paying benefits and payroll taxes. Uber, DoorDash, and the freelance revolution are marketed as freedom, but functionally they are a return to piecework labor with zero security. This shifts the operational costs of business, the car, the gas, the healthcare, the risk, from the corporation onto the individual worker. The government's response to economic crises further illustrates the divide. During the 2008 crash and the 2020 pandemic, the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars to stabilize the markets. This quantitative easing flooded the system with money. When you print money, it has to go somewhere. It flowed into assets, stocks, real estate, and crypto. This caused asset price inflation. If you already owned assets, boomers Gen X, you got richer. If you didn't own assets and lived on wages, Gen Z, your cost of living skyrocketed while your purchasing power diluted. The mechanism of saving the economy was effectively a bailout for asset holders paid for by the inflation experienced by wage earners. The system prioritized the solvency of the stock market over the affordability of life. This is not a conspiracy in the shadowy cloak and dagger sense. It is a conspiracy of incentives. The politicians, the board members, and the voting blocs with the most power are all incentivized to keep asset prices high and wages suppressed. They are voting their wallets. The policies regarding tax cuts for the wealthy, the erosion of antitrust laws allowing massive corporate consolidation, and the refusal to raise the minimum wage are all gears in the same machine. This machine is designed to extract value from labor and store it in capital. Gen Z finds themselves in a rigged casino where the house has not only stacked the deck, but has also locked the door. They are playing a game of Monopoly where all the properties were bought up 3 rounds before they were even born, and they are just going around the board paying rent, waiting for a chance to pass go that provides less and less relief every time. And when you realize the board is locked, the properties are sold, and the rent is mathematically unpayable, the only rational move left is to stop playing the game by their rules. This brings us to the future, which is not going to be a return to the normalcy of the 1990s, but rather a turbulent transition into a completely new economic paradigm. The establishment keeps dangling a carrot known as the Great Wealth Transfer. They promise that as boomers pass on, trillions of dollars will flow down to Gen Z and millennials, acting as a deus ex machina that solves the inequality crisis. Do not bank on this. This is arguably the final lie of the old economic order. First, look at the cost of aging. The American healthcare system is designed to extract maximum value from the dying. With nursing home care costing upwards of $10,000 to $12,000 a month, and with boomers living longer with chronic conditions, a massive portion of that generational wealth is going to be liquidated to pay the medical industrial complex. Secondly, wealth is highly concentrated. The top 10% of boomers hold the vast majority of the assets. If you are not in the lineage of that top decile, you are inheriting debt, trauma, and maybe a used sedan. So if the cavalry isn't coming, what is the strategy? We are seeing the rise of a phenomenon sociologists call tang ping or laying flat, originating in China but applicable globally. It is a silent, unorganized general strike. If the cost of striving exceeds the reward of the effort, the human animal conserves energy. Gen Z is not quiet quitting because they are lazy. They are engaging in a rational economic boycott. The most devastating weapon in this arsenal is the refusal to reproduce. The birth rate collapsing below replacement levels is the ultimate vote of no confidence in the future. The entire Ponzi scheme of the modern economy, social security, the stock market, real estate, relies on infinite growth and a steady supply of new workers to pay into the system. By refusing to have children they cannot afford, Gen Z is effectively starving the beast. It is a grim form of leverage, but it is leverage nonetheless. For the individual looking to survive right now, the solution lies in stoic adaptation and geo-arbitrage. The geography of the 20th century success story, move to a big city, get a corporate job, climb the ladder, is dead. The cost of living in hubs like New York or London destroys the capacity to build wealth. The new strategy is decentralized. We are seeing a migration not just to cheaper states, but to cheaper nations. If your income can be digitized, staying in a jurisdiction that demands 50% of your income for rent is financial suicide. The digital nomad lifestyle is often glamorized on Instagram, but stripping away the filters, it is a survival tactic. Culturally, we must dismantle the shame associated with failing by 20th century standards. Living with parents into your late 20s or 30s is not a sign of arrested development. It is a return to the multi-generational living arrangements that have been the human norm for thousands of years. The nuclear family experiment, the idea that every two people need their own house, lawnmower, and washing machine, was a temporary anomaly fueled by the post-war economic boom. It was inefficient and isolating. Returning to communal living, co-ops, and shared resources is not regression. It is resilience. It is pooling resources to withstand the siege. The roommate phase is no longer a phase. It is the new structure of urban survival, and destigmatizing it is crucial for mental health. Furthermore, the education narrative needs to be violently rewritten. The era of the prestige degree is over for anyone who has to borrow money to get it. The ROI isn't there. The future belongs to the skilled trade and the specific outcome. We are seeing a pivot toward vocational pragmatism. Plumbing, electrical work, specialized coding, trades that cannot be automated by AI or outsourced to the lowest global bidder. These are the new safe harbors. Gen Z is beginning to bypass the university gatekeepers entirely, utilizing the internet to self-educate. This demonetizes the university system, which is the only way to force it to lower prices. When the customers stop showing up, the price must come down. Politically, the timeline is on Gen Z's side, even if the current moment feels hopeless. Actuarial science is undefeated. The gerontocracy, the rule of the old, will end simply because mortality is inevitable. As the boomer voting bloc shrinks, the political stranglehold on housing policy and tax breaks for the wealthy will loosen. We are heading toward a massive political realignment. We will likely see the rise of aggressive populist policies, bans on corporate ownership of single-family homes, massive taxes on non-primary residences, and perhaps even debt jubilees. History shows that when the wealth gap becomes this wide, the pendulum snaps back. It rarely snaps back politely. The conclusion is not a happy ending, but a call to clarity. The American dream you were sold was a marketing brochure for a destination that no longer exists. Stop trying to buy a ticket to 1990. The anger you feel is valid, the contract was broken. But anger without strategy is just friction. The path forward is to starve the traditional systems of your money and attention. Don't buy the overpriced house. Don't take the predatory loan. Don't loyalty pledge to the corporation. Build parallel networks of support, lower your burn rate, and prepare for the volatility of the transition. You are not broke because you failed. You are broke because the game was designed to extract your wealth before you even earned it. The moment you understand the math is the moment you stop blaming yourself and start plotting your escape. The old world is dying and the new one is struggling to be born. Your only job is to survive the interval.